Welcome back to another episode of the React Native Radio Podcast. Brought to you by Alltreat, easily the best week of the year at Infinite Red. Episode 278, Real Life React Native with Matt Wood from Teamworks.
Hello everyone, I'm Mazen, and this is the new series on React Native Radio called Real Life React Native. This is a series where we interview developers who work on real-life React Native apps. People who actually have users and are actually shipping native apps to production. It's quick, fun, rapid fire. Let's get started. Today I'm sitting down with Matt Wood, a fellow Durhamite who I've run into twice, 3 times in the past 2 weeks at different breakfast joints around here. It's fun because it's such a small town. Matt is a mobile lead at Teamworks, where he focuses on the core hub React Native app. Matt graduated from Northeastern University with his Bachelor of Science in Electrical and Computer Engineering. Both in and out of school, Matt initially targeted embedded devices as a firmware engineer. Working for Republic Wireless, he made the switch to native Android development and then React Native. In his free time, he spends time with his wife and 2 kids, flying planes and leading a monthly food pantry. Thanks for coming on, Matt.
Mazen, thanks for having me on.
Happy to see you yet again, this time virtually though, rather than at a breakfast spot.
Yeah, I love that we've had a couple chance encounters here in the past few weeks. That's been awesome.
In addition to breakfast sandwiches, we have a common interest in flying planes, it sounds like.
That is awesome to know. We'll have to get up sometime.
Yeah, I've gone up a few times. I'd love to go on more. Here at IR, we actually have a retired developer, Brian, who is building his own plane from a kit. I wouldn't say scratch. It's kind of scratch, but it's a kit that keeps arriving in different boxes to his house. So maybe one day.
That's so awesome. I was at AirVenture. What was that? 2-3 weeks ago? The big US air show. Yeah. Great time.
That's awesome. Well, let's get into our show, Real Life React Native, Teamworks. Matt, what's the elevator pitch for your app?
So Teamworks' vision for the operating system of sports is to create the most powerful tech platform in sports, digitizing and seamlessly connecting every phase of the athlete lifecycle, serving both the administrators and the student athletes. To date, Teamworks has brought together best-in-class products across the sports industry to build a comprehensive list of offerings for our customers. We've consolidated their invoices into one, reduced the number of tech partners that they are interfacing with, and we've also started to bridge the gaps between the department areas. Over the next 3 years, we want to build out one platform, an integrated experience where staff logs into one location, Teamworks, to perform their daily tasks. Athletes can log in into one location, also Teamworks, to view a master dashboard and calendar to manage all their on and off field responsibilities.
I think the listeners kind of get the gist here that not only did I bring a fellow Durhamite with a company that was started by a Duke alumni, which is kind of right across the street from my house, but also a sports related app. I think everyone now knows where most of my allegiances lie when it comes to sports. That's awesome. When I was coaching, I do remember we had a lot of tools that we used, and it was tough because they were all over the place, and we would, hate to say it, but we would print a lot of paper and get to use those all over the place. So I'm happy to hear that you guys are making it easier, not just for the athletes, but also for the staff, and digitizing it so it's available on iPads and devices. That's awesome.
Yeah. We know that there's a buy-in, right, to people to download an app and then actually make use of it and not just go and uninstall it. So we want to make sure that we're fitting into that lifestyle and that people are able to accomplish what they need from that single source.
That's awesome. When did you start using React Native and why did you make the switch?
So I started using React Native around 2018. And it was really to build out early kind of prototypes to be able to mess around with. So at the time I was at Republic Wireless, which is an MVNO, and they were looking at new ways to do communication, predominantly asynchronous. And we just wanted to build an app faster, one that we could target both iOS and Android with at the same time. And React Native was that answer. There's obviously other technologies that are out there, but we saw the community in React Native. And so that was the kind of pull for my career to get into React Native development.
It's awesome. I know you mentioned earlier that you're the mobile lead for the hub at Teamworks. Do you mind just giving us a quick blurb on what the hub is for in relation to the entire application?
Yeah, so the hub is our core app. And when people are going to the Play Store or the App Store to download the app, the Teamworks app, that's what they're downloading. It has the core of everything that they need. It's got their rosters, their communication, scheduling, ticketing, file sharing, and travel on it. And then as Teamworks has grown, there's a lot of news out there of recent acquisitions that we've had. We're building onto that, again, to create the one platform for everybody. That includes nutrition, human performance, recruitment, and student athlete development.
Everyone wants to know this. What's your architecture stack? And why did you choose some of those main items?
And Teamworks started development with React Native way back in 2017. So you can imagine traditional JavaScript class components, and we were driving everything through Redux sagas. You look and fast forward, here we are 6 years down the road, and we've transitioned roughly 75% of our code to TypeScript. Our stack is what I'd like to affectionately call a bare bones functional components with custom hooks that we're building on top of what React Native provides us. And so we're using GraphQL, Apollo Client, and GraphQL CodeGen for our front-end client to reach out to the network.
That's awesome. I'm actually glad to hear that you guys made the switch over to TypeScript, and it sounds like you still have a ways to go, but that's also great. And I think another thing for our listeners, and I'm not sure if I haven't been hearing much about it, but GraphQL CodeGen is a very, very strong tool that I think a lot of people should leverage and use, mainly if you're in that TypeScript realm also. Any other highlights from your architecture?
Yeah, I think touching real quick on the powers of GraphQL CodeGen, the benefit that we see from it is so many of our developers are full stack. That's the sell of React Native, right? That you've got React web developers, and effectively, if you've got Node.js developers, that they're kind of able to work through the whole of the stack. And so connecting those back-end data models straight through to the front end and what you're rendering out is the power that we've seen from that. So yeah, as we're trying to pare down the Redux sagas that are there, we see honestly a limited need for global state. There's some existing React context that we have, and where we want to manage high-level state like authentication, then we're leaning towards Zustand and still kind of evaluating and prototyping what we want there. Obviously, being a React Native app, we're using React Navigation under the hood, and that's worked well for us. We use Emotion, which is kind of a rebranded styled components for theming. Yeah. And we're using Paper for those actual components, the material UI library provided by CallStack. And then we are really big into testing. If you can tell by my shirt, for those of you who can't see it, it says test all the things. And so under the hood, we're using React Native testing library for our unit tests. And we have Detox for our end-to-end testing.
Have you evaluated Maestro or not yet?
So I've been following what Ignite has been doing, and obviously in terms of moving toward Maestro and just trying to learn from what's there. We are interested in looking at Maestro as a complementary solution. The big win that we see from Detox is testing some of the inbound notifications and how those navigate people throughout the app. Obviously, there are ways to mock that out with Maestro. And so what is neat, especially as we look at the larger Teamworks portfolio, is that we could build out an end-to-end test suite that can cover many different types of apps, other apps that we have natively or in Ionic that would be limited by Detox testing and its limitations with testing web views.
That's awesome. I'm happy to hear that not only are you leveraging just Detox, but there's also other things that can be plugged in to give you that full suite and kind of cover everything that you need. Can you describe some unique challenges that you encountered while developing your app using React Native? Did you all start off with a native app and then make the migration over to React Native, or was it always React Native?
So it actually started out as a Cordova app. There's been a Teamworks application since 2012. And obviously Cordova has become, or I'm sorry, is a PhoneGap app, has now become Adobe Cordova. And we saw at the time that we made the transition to React Native that wasn't giving us the performance that we needed. We also just, at that point, were developing for React Native Web and saw the benefits of being able to pair up. So getting back to some of the challenges that we've encountered developing, honestly, the biggest one that we'll continue to pay attention to is just our memory management. This is a super app. Conventionally, you have separate apps that you're using for messaging, for your calendar, et cetera. And those are all built into Teamworks. And so we have to be really careful when it comes to our memory that we're getting our slices of data back into storage and we're only hydrating what we need. And you're managing a lot of people, right? Some of these organizations are hundreds, thousands of people. And so again, pagination performance of loading in visual assets. I mentioned, files. So we're trying to be very careful there. What we've encountered for the most part around that is just the traditional hydration aspects of any state management library, right? So you think about Redux Saga, or even in our case, Apollo Persist, and they're typically set up where the app instantiates, it's pulling information out of the device's storage, putting it into memory and making it available. And so again, where you've got heavy architectures, which have a lot in global state, that's something that we're working to make sure that we're staying on top of. And obviously the apps themselves, as you bring new components in, are using memory. So that's just something that we're continually working on. We're also just continually reminding ourselves, as so many of our developers are full stack, that mobile and web are not the same. When it comes to design, you need a lot more scalable design for the different form factors that you have for mobile. Performance is a lot more restricted on your mid and low tier Android devices. Components are touch interactive on mobile, whereas web has hover tips. Notifications, although they exist on both platforms, are certainly more interactive on mobile. And it's important that those can get people not just to a website, but deep within the app where they can make interaction. And then we just talked about navigation. And again, managing back navigation for Android. And just talking to our developers this morning, building up those stacks and how people expect to navigate within tabs and within stack screens are just different than the conventional URL path paradigm that exists over in web.
So you mentioned switching away from Cordova due to performance. Can you give us a couple examples on ways that you optimize performance for your app? Because it sounds like performance is always at the forefront of your developers' minds.
Absolutely. And I want to go back to where we talked about architecture, where general good practice gets us very far in performance, reducing the size of our view stacks and keeping our package JSON slim. Also, we were talking about memory, and memoization is another big key for us. I was at a great talk at Render ATL. I saw many of the Infinite Red folks there, by Tala Nakvi from Shopify, and just how to utilize FlashList to get the performance that it promises. FlashList has brought on its own some amazing performance improvements for us, and the guidance given memoizing those list items has provided a major boost. Again, thinking back to the memory usage and the trade-off of needing to re-render items. We talked about our network stack and the power that we're seeing out of the Apollo client to leverage the cache and to reduce the network calls that we need to make on each screen. In the future, we want to look to flame graph and using tools like Why Did I Re-Render to better understand when those instances are happening and again, reduce our usage of the CPU.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think the one point that I want to stress is making those API calls. We need that data to come from the back end. So trying to figure out a way to make sure that we do it not a lot, but we find the right and opportune time to make those calls so the user's not waiting for something or just looking at a blank screen sort of thing.
And going back to those differences between mobile and web, right? Like we have the power to easily keep things in storage and for a long time. So that's a lot of what, and I guess getting back into the flame graph, why did I re-render? Time to paint, right? It's such a big thing that we think about all the time in React Native. And so what are we able to get from storage? What can we show immediately as we're loading storage in so that people have an interactive environment and so that we're only getting what we need to be able to paint that first page and then transition them onward as they live the lifecycle inside the app.
Have you had to integrate with any native modules or libraries? How was that experience? And then also, have you had to build any custom native implementations?
So we certainly have libraries that have native code, and I like to put those on a varying scale of highly native. We think about libraries like Reanimated that are down in the C, C++ stack. And then kind of the other side of that scale where we have native libraries, which are really just exposing iOS and Android libraries to us as React Native developers. Datadog is a common one that we're using there. We have not built out anything on our own, and we really prefer it that way. I wonder if that lessens the case for React Native, but it means that maintainability, everything at that JavaScript layer, and all of those React developers who are living in that familiar space are able to move throughout our mobile stack.
Yeah, I think that's something that a lot of times we forget. The value of React Native sometimes is you don't have to worry or think about the native side of things. And the fact that you all have a successful app out there that's being used right now by professional teams also, not just in soccer, but other sports, that you don't have to jump in and do any custom native implementations. That's also a great testament to the community and the great packages that are being put out there.
Absolutely. The community and their maintenance of those packages, as we know, Android and iOS themselves are changing so much. Right? Since 2012, 2017, we've seen the introduction of both Kotlin and Swift. And so for those native libraries, especially ones like Reanimated, who have been around the whole time, it's a testament to their hard work.
Kind of on that same vein of iOS versus Android, have you dealt with any cross-platform differences while using React Native? How did you handle those differences?
I would say very mildly, and this goes back again to the case of not trying to introduce native code. And that's really our preference. We have a lot less stylistic differences that we see in React Native than we did in the earlier days. Typically, if we build something and we're often using iOS simulators, when we go and check it over in Android, it commonly looks the same way, which is a major benefit for us. There are small intentional places that we do. Navigation and the back button on iOS device is a caret, and on an Android device is an actual arrow. And there's obviously still refinement to happen here, right? You think about the picker from React Native and how different it is between iOS and Android. And so I like where there's flexibility, but at the same time, we see a lot of power in it looking the same and creating an app that feels like Teamworks, not which feels like iOS or Android.
Cool. What advice would you give companies considering React Native?
Good foundations in React are so important, especially around performance, and so much more so than we've found in web. And so understanding how to build out your own custom hooks, how to check the flame graph, and really understanding why things re-render is so much more important from what we found in mobile. I like that we have at least one mobile dev and that we expect our other teams to specialize in mobile. We talked about the differences there between web and mobile. And so having some of that expertise as it pertains to mobile and how to build things for React Native isn't necessary, but it's helpful for a really good React Native app. I would tell people to make the argument for why you need it. Compare it to native, compare it to web, and compare it to Ionic. Maintainability is a whole new animal when it comes to any mobile app, and React Native is no exception. So make sure that you're ready for that. Or can you get by with a PWA, with a scalable web app? You also don't just have to choose one. We're now in the space with these companies that have joined forces with us, where we've got the core React Native app. We have the flexibility to use portals from Ionic. We are actively using web views from our other apps. And so tailor it to your own needs. And then I would say, feel good in your decision. The ecosystem, the community that we've talked about are solid. So don't sweat, where we've seen earlier articles on React Native that it's not going to be around for a long time, and that the community, the components will always be available.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that foundation in React is very important. Putting together a training plan right now for a client, and that was chapter 1. And the first comment I get back is, well, aren't you supposed to be helping us with React Native? It's like, yep, we need to make sure we fully understand React lifecycle, React hooks, and all that before we even start talking about the mobile device itself. So I completely agree with you on that. So on the other side of that, we've kind of convinced the companies now. What advice would you then give the new React Native developers out there, or even the developers making the switch to React Native?
So I would say if you have time, trying to maintain a native app would be hugely beneficial. Something that we're constantly doing as React Native changes is just how to keep our iOS splash screen alive. And that comes before the React Native app ever loads in. Also, just like we talked about with companies, right? Understanding performance, when to make the trade-off of memory versus re-render in your memoization. Having those early foundational pieces of React, like we just talked about, will get you very far. And then lean on the community. Infinite Red has an incredible Slack workspace. There's so many articles out there. I personally think a great start is the State of React Native, which was produced by Software Mansion, has a plethora of examples of where to learn from, the top components, and what people are using for high-level components.
Awesome. Yeah, there's a lot of resources out there, and I think that article, State of React Native from Software Mansion, is a good starting point. Well, I think that wraps it up for us today. Thank you, Matt, for joining me today on our Real Life React Native series. It was nice having you.
Thank you, Mazen.
If you'd like to be on this new series and talk about your experience using React Native in the real world, email us at rnradio@infinite.red. Again, that's rnradio@infinite.red. Introduce yourself and you're out. See you all next time.